What if everything we thought we knew about human civilization was wrong? Deep beneath the sands of modern-day Iraq, archaeologists have unearthed clay tablets that challenge our fundamental understanding of human origins. These aren't just ancient stories. They're detailed accounts that read more like historical records than mythology. The Sumerians, Earth's first known civilization, left behind texts describing beings called the Anunnaki, who descended from heaven to earth, possessing advanced knowledge that transformed primitive humans into builders of cities, creators of writing, and masters of agriculture, seemingly overnight. The ancient city of Eridu stood as humanity's first urban center, rising from the marshlands around 5400 BCE. But according to Sumerian records, this wasn't gradual human development. It was the result of intervention by beings described with unsettling precision. The Sumerian king list, discovered in multiple copies across Mesopotamia, speaks of rulers who reigned for impossibly long periods. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. These weren't metaphorical years. The Sumerians were meticulous record keepers who distinguished between mythological time and historical time. They maintained detailed astronomical observations, created the first known legal codes, and developed mathematics so sophisticated that their base 60 system still governs how we measure time and angles today. Yet they insisted that their knowledge came from the Anunnaki, beings whose very name meant those who from heaven to earth came. Uli the Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, provides disturbing details about these beings. Unlike the vague creation stories of other cultures, it reads like a technical manual. It describes the Anunnaki's arrival from a planet called Nibiru, their establishment of settlements, and their genetic manipulation of primitive humans to create a workforce. The text states, "Let me put blood together, and make bones too. Let me set up primeval man, that man may bear the yoke of the gods." What makes these accounts particularly compelling is their consistency across thousands of years and multiple civilizations. The Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians all inherited and preserved these stories, adding their own detailed commentaries. They weren't creating new myths, they were preserving what they believed to be historical truth. Archaeological evidence supports the Sumerians' claims of sudden advancement. The transition from primitive hunter-gatherer societies to sophisticated urban civilizations happened with unprecedented speed in Mesopotamia. Writing, the wheel, metallurgy, astronomy, and complex agriculture all appeared within a remarkably short time frame. Modern archaeologists call this the Sumerian problem, the inability to trace the gradual development of these innovations. The tablets describe the Anunnaki as tall beings with elongated skulls, arriving in skyboats that could traverse the heavens. They established 7 cities, each serving specific functions in what appears to be a colonial operation. Eridu was their first settlement, followed by Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, and Shurupak. Each city was assigned to specific Anunnaki leaders who the Sumerians would later worship as gods. But were they gods, or were they something else entirely? The Sumerian texts make a crucial distinction that modern interpreters often miss. They use different words for the Anunnaki and for what we would call divine concepts. The Anunnaki were described as physical beings who ate, drank, fought among themselves and died. They required worship and tribute, but they weren't omnipotent or omniscient. They were powerful, technologically advanced and long-lived, but decidedly mortal. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to join us as we dive deeper into these ancient mysteries. Next week, we'll examine the shocking details of how these beings allegedly created modern humans through genetic manipulation. Leave a comment below. What do you think about these ancient accounts? Are we looking at mythology or something far more extraordinary? In the basement of the British Museum, Tablet K. The 364 contains what may be the most explosive account of human origins ever recorded. Written in cuneiform script over 4,000 years ago, it describes in clinical detail how the Anunnaki combined their genetic material with that of primitive hominids to create modern humans. This isn't poetic metaphor, it reads like a laboratory report. The Epic of Atrahasis, one of the oldest and most complete versions of this account, provides step-by-step documentation of what appears to be genetic engineering. The text describes how Enki, the Anunnaki chief scientist, and Ninmah, described as a medical expert, conducted experiments to create the perfect worker. The tablets state, "You, Ninmah, are the womb goddess, the one who creates mankind. Create Lulu, the worker, let him bear the yoke." But the process wasn't simple. The text described multiple failed attempts, creating beings with various defects before achieving success. This detail is particularly striking because it mirrors exactly what modern genetic engineering would encounter: failed experiments before successful outcomes. Ancient mythologies typically describe perfect, instantaneous creation. These accounts describe trial and error, scientific methodology, and gradual improvement through repeated attempts. The Sumerian word Lulu is particularly revealing. While often translated as primitive worker, its literal meaning is the mixed one, suggesting a hybrid being created from two different genetic sources. The texts explicitly state that human creation required combining the clay of the earth, primitive hominid DNA, with the blood of the gods, Anunnaki genetic material. Even more fascinating is the description of the creation location. The tablets describe a specialized facility called the House of Shimti, literally translated as the house where the breath of life is breathed in. This wasn't a temple or sacred grove, but what appears to be a medical facility with specific equipment for biological procedures. The texts describe purification rituals, mixing vessels, and gestation chambers in language that sounds remarkably similar to modern descriptions of genetic laboratories. The Babylonian creation account, the Enuma Elish, provides additional technical details. It describes how Marduk, an Anunnaki leader, used the blood of Kingu to create humans, but specifies that this required skill in craftwork and wisdom. The text emphasizes that human creation was a deliberate technological achievement, not a divine miracle. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamian sites supports these accounts in unexpected ways. Excavations at Tel Essawan and other early Neolithic sites show evidence of advanced medical procedures, including sophisticated surgical tools and what appear to be operating tables. Carbon dating places these medical facilities at the exact time frame when the Sumerian texts claim human creation occurred. The genetic evidence is equally intriguing. Modern DNA analysis reveals that Homo sapiens experienced a sudden evolutionary leap approximately 200,000 years ago, exactly when Sumerian chronologies place the Anunnaki genetic experiments. The jump from earlier hominids to modern humans shows changes that would typically require millions of years of gradual evolution, yet occurred in what evolutionary biologists call an impossibly short time frame. Perhaps most disturbing is what the texts say about human purpose. The Epic of Atrahasis explicitly states that humans were created as a slave species to perform labor the Anunnaki found tedious, primarily mining operations and agricultural work. The text declares, "Let man carry the yoke of the gods." This wasn't about spiritual worship or cosmic purpose. It was about creating a biological workforce. The tablets describe specific modifications made to ensure human compliance. Humans were given limited lifespans, unlike their Anunnaki creators, who lived for thousands of years. They were made physically weaker and intellectually inferior, capable of complex tasks but unable to challenge their creators. Most significantly, they were programmed with an innate compulsion to worship and serve beings they perceived as gods. This selective breeding program continued for generations. The texts describe how certain human bloodlines were chosen for leadership roles, creating royal dynasties that served as intermediaries between the Anunnaki and the general human population. These chosen bloodlines were given longer lifespans and greater knowledge, but remained subordinate to their Anunnaki masters. The Sumerian king list documents this hybrid ruling class with characteristic precision. It lists kings who ruled for centuries rather than decades, describing them as those who came down from heaven, but distinguishing them from the pure-blood Anunnaki. These semi-divine rulers established the first monarchies, creating governmental systems designed to maintain Anunnaki control over human populations. What's remarkable is how these accounts spread throughout the ancient world with remarkable consistency. Egyptian texts describe similar genetic creation by their gods, using nearly identical terminology. The Hindu Vedas speak of genetic manipulation by the Anuna, remarkably similar to Anunnaki. Even distant cultures like the Maya and the Aboriginal Australians have creation stories involving sky beings who genetically modified primitive humans. Modern genetic research has identified what scientists call genetic bottlenecks in human evolution, periods when human genetic diversity suddenly decreased, suggesting small populations experienced rapid expansion. These bottlenecks correspond exactly to the timeframes described in Mesopotamian texts for human creation and subsequent population expansions. The evidence keeps mounting, but the implications are staggering. If you're finding this as mind-blowing as we are, smash that like button and share this video. Next week, we'll explore how these genetic experiments allegedly led to a catastrophic war between the Anunnaki themselves, and how humans became caught in the crossfire. What do you think about these genetic creation accounts? Could ancient texts be describing real scientific procedures? What happens when advanced beings with the power of gods turn against each other? According to ancient texts, humanity nearly went extinct finding out. The Mesopotamian archives contain detailed accounts of what may be the most devastating conflict in human history. A war between factions of the Anunnaki that left entire civilizations in ruins and altered the course of human development forever. These weren't mythological battles between good and evil. They were power struggles between technologically advanced beings fighting for control of Earth's resources and human populations. The conflict began with a succession crisis that reveals the very human nature of these allegedly divine beings. When Anu, the Anunnaki ruler, divided Earth's territories between his sons Enlil and Enki, he set the stage for a rivalry that would span millennia. Enlil received dominion over the atmosphere and dry land, while Enki controlled the waters and underground regions. But this division was never accepted by both parties. The Epic of Gilgamesh, often dismissed as pure mythology, contains detailed military accounts that read like ancient war reports. It describes weapons that made the earth tremble, projectiles that flew like birds across the sky, and battles that lit up the heavens like day. These descriptions become particularly significant when compared to other ancient texts from around the world that describe similar conflicts using remarkably similar language. The Hindu Mahabharata, composed thousands of miles from Mesopotamia, describes battles involving vimanas, flying vehicles that launched Brahmastra weapons capable of destroying entire armies. The descriptions of these weapons' effects, radiation sickness, hair and nail loss, genetic damage, align perfectly with modern understanding of nuclear warfare. The Sanskrit texts even describe the environmental aftermath. Trees withered, rivers ran backwards, and the earth became barren for generations. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts of widespread destruction. Excavations at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley reveal cities that were suddenly abandoned around 2000 BCE with evidence of intense heat that vitrified pottery and melted building stones. Similar destruction layers have been found at sites across Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Anatolia, all dating to the same approximate time frame. The Mesopotamian texts provide strategic details about this conflict that demonstrate sophisticated military thinking. The War of the Kings, described in the Book of Jubilees and referenced in Genesis, wasn't a simple battle, but a complex geopolitical conflict involving multiple Anunnaki factions and their human allies. Each faction controlled specific territories and resources, turning the entire ancient Near East into a battlefield. Enlil's faction controlled the northern regions, establishing strongholds in what would become Assyria and Anatolia. They commanded the Igigi, described as the Anunnaki's air force, giving them significant tactical advantages. Enlil's human allies included the peoples who would later become the Akkadians and Assyrians, cultures known for their military prowess and administrative efficiency. Enki's faction dominated the southern territories, controlling the Sumerian cities and the Persian Gulf region. They possessed superior knowledge of genetics and medicine, giving them different strategic advantages. Enki's human allies were primarily the Sumerians and later the Babylonians, cultures that excelled in science, mathematics, and engineering. The conflict escalated when Enlil decided to reduce human populations through a planned catastrophe. The Atrahasis epic describes his reasoning with chilling logic. Humans had become too numerous and noisy, disrupting Anunnaki operations. More significantly, some humans were beginning to develop technological capabilities that threatened Anunnaki supremacy. Enlil's solution was systematic genocide. The Sumerian flood narrative, later adapted into the biblical story of Noah, describes Enlil's attempt to eliminate humanity through environmental warfare. But the texts reveal this wasn't a natural disaster. It was a deliberate attack, using what appears to be weather manipulation technology. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes how the gods sent storms that lasted 6 days and nights, causing worldwide flooding. However, Enki opposed this genocide and secretly warned his human ally, Utnapishtim, the original Noah figure, to build an ark and preserve human genetic diversity. This act of defiance transformed the conflict from a territorial dispute into an ideological war over humanity's future. The texts describe how Enki provided Utnapishtim with specific technical specifications for the ark, including sealed compartments, pitch-based waterproofing, and precise measurements for stability. The aftermath of the flood reveals the true scope of Anunnaki technology. The texts describe how they surveyed the earth from the sky, assessed damage, and began rebuilding operations with industrial efficiency. They relocated surviving human populations, re-established agricultural systems, and rebuilt cities according to new strategic requirements. But the war wasn't over. The post-flood period saw continued conflicts as different Anunnaki factions competed for control of the depleted human population. The Tower of Babel incident, described in both Mesopotamian and biblical sources, represents another flashpoint in this ongoing conflict. The texts suggest humans had begun developing technology that could threaten Anunnaki aerial superiority, possibly early radio or radar systems that could detect and track their aircraft. The Anunnaki response was swift and decisive. They destroyed the tower, scattered the human population, and deliberately confused human languages to prevent future technological collaboration. This wasn't divine punishment for hubris. It was a strategic military operation designed to maintain technological superiority. The most disturbing aspect of these conflicts is how they shaped human civilization. The texts describe how the Anunnaki factions began using humans as proxy armies, establishing competing religions and ideologies to maintain control. They created pantheons of gods that reflected their own political structures, turning human worship into a form of political allegiance. Evidence of this religious manipulation appears throughout ancient texts. The same Anunnaki beings appear in different cultures under different names, but with identical characteristics and stories. Enki becomes Ea in Babylonian texts, Ptah in Egyptian records, and Prometheus in Greek mythology. Enlil appears as Baal in Canaanite religions and Zeus in Greek traditions. The consistency suggests coordinated cultural programming rather than independent mythological development. This is getting darker than we expected, but the evidence keeps leading us down this path. If this ancient conspiracy theory is blowing your mind, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Next week, we'll explore the most shocking revelation: how the Anunnaki allegedly abandoned Earth, leaving behind hidden knowledge and the promise of return. Drop a comment. Do you think these ancient wars actually happened? Every ancient civilization on Earth tells the same story. The gods departed, but they promised to return. What if they meant it literally? Around 600 BCE, something unprecedented happened across the ancient world. From Mesopotamia to Egypt, from Greece to India, the direct interaction between gods and humans suddenly ceased. The beings who had guided human civilization for millennia simply vanished, leaving behind only memories, monuments, and mysterious promises of eventual return. The Mesopotamian texts provide the most detailed account of this departure and reveal why it happened. The Epic of Era describes the final phase of Anunnaki presence on Earth with the clinical precision characteristic of Mesopotamian record-keeping. Unlike mythological endings found in other cultures, this account reads like a military withdrawal plan. The text describes how Marduk, one of the primary Anunnaki leaders, announced, "I will go up to heaven, I will give my commands, I will direct my regulations." But this wasn't ascension to a spiritual realm. It was a strategic retreat to orbital stations. The reasons for departure reveal the ultimate failure of the Anunnaki colonization project. After centuries of genetic manipulation, resource extraction, and population control, they faced an unexpected problem. Humans were evolving beyond their original programming. Despite artificial limitations built into human DNA, some individuals were developing capabilities that approached Anunnaki levels. Even more threatening, humans were beginning to reproduce these abilities through selective breeding and knowledge preservation. The Sumerian text known as the Adapa myth describes this evolutionary threat. Adapa, described as the sage of Eridu, developed intellectual capabilities that approached those of his Anunnaki creators. When brought before Anu, the Anunnaki ruler, he demonstrated knowledge of the plan of heaven and earth, suggesting he had gained access to advanced scientific information. The text describes Anu's alarm. Why did Ea reveal to worthless mankind the plan of heaven and earth? This wasn't an isolated incident. The Book of Enoch, preserved in Ethiopian and other traditions, describes how a group of Anunnaki called Watchers violated protocols by sharing advanced knowledge with humans. They taught metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, and what the text calls forbidden sciences. Zid, the human students of these rebels became the legendary heroes and kings of antiquity, individuals with lifespans and capabilities far exceeding normal human parameters. The Anunnaki response to this knowledge contamination was systematic and brutal. The texts describe a purge campaign targeting both the rebel Anunnaki and their human students. The Book of Enoch states, "And now the giants who are produced from the spirits and flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling." This wasn't referring to literal giants, but to the hybrid offspring of Anunnaki human breeding programs who possessed enhanced capabilities. Archaeological evidence supports this account of widespread destruction targeting advanced ancient civilizations. Sites across the globe show evidence of sudden abandonment, deliberate destruction of libraries and knowledge centers, and the systematic elimination of populations with advanced technical capabilities. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria was just the most famous example of a pattern that began millennia earlier. But the Anunnaki departure wasn't complete abandonment, it was strategic withdrawal. The Mesopotamian texts describe the establishment of monitoring stations and the selection of human bloodlines to serve as caretakers of hidden knowledge. These chosen lineages became the priestly classes and secret societies that would preserve Anunnaki teachings through the ages. The text known as the Sumerian King List provides crucial details about this transition. It describes how direct Anunnaki rule ended, but kingship was transferred to selected human dynasties with the mandate to keep the ways of the gods. These royal bloodlines were given access to hidden knowledge repositories and communication devices that allowed limited contact with the departed Anunnaki. Evidence of these knowledge preservation systems appears throughout ancient civilizations. The Great Pyramid of Giza, constructed with mathematical precision that rivals modern engineering, contains chambers and passages that serve no apparent burial function. Recent scanning technology has revealed additional hidden chambers that appear designed for communication equipment rather than tomb furnishings. Similar structures appear worldwide, all built during the post-departure period using knowledge that supposedly primitive civilizations shouldn't have possessed. The Nazca lines in Peru, visible only from the air, appear to be landing strips or navigation markers. Pumapunku in Bolivia shows evidence of machine-precision stone cutting that modern technology struggles to replicate. Easter Island's Moai statues face inland toward the sky, not the ocean, as if watching for the return of aerial visitors. The most significant evidence of continued Anunnaki influence lies in the preservation of their original texts. Despite repeated attempts at destruction by conquering empires and religious authorities, copies of Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian tablets survived in hidden libraries and secret collections. The knowledge they contain, advanced mathematics, astronomical calculations, metallurgical formulas, and medical procedures, was carefully preserved by initiated groups throughout history. These preservation societies operated across cultures and continents, maintaining identical knowledge despite apparent isolation. The similarities between Mayan astronomy, Egyptian mathematics, and Mesopotamian medicine suggest coordinated preservation efforts rather than independent development. Secret societies, from the medieval Islamic world to Renaissance Europe, maintained these traditions, often at great personal risk. The texts also describe monitoring protocols established before departure. The Anunnaki allegedly maintained orbital observation stations and periodic reconnaissance missions to assess human development. The accounts describe how they would intervene if humans approached certain technological thresholds, or if the hidden knowledge became publicly accessible. Historical evidence supports this intervention pattern. Throughout history, civilizations approaching advanced technological capabilities have experienced sudden collapses or redirections. The Roman Empire's military technology was advancing toward industrial capabilities when it mysteriously fragmented. Medieval Islamic science was approaching revolutionary breakthroughs when it suddenly stagnated. The pattern suggests external limitation rather than natural development cycles. Most significantly, the texts contain detailed prophecies about the conditions that would trigger Anunnaki return. These weren't vague spiritual predictions, but specific technological and social benchmarks. The return would occur when humans developed flight capabilities, global communication networks, genetic manipulation technology, and nuclear weapons, essentially when they recreated the technological base the Anunnaki possessed millennia ago. The Mesopotamian text, known as the Prophecy of Naram Sin, states, "When mankind learns to fly like birds, speak across great distances like gods, and split the atom of matter, then shall the Anunnaki return to reclaim their inheritance." Modern readers cannot help but notice that humanity achieved all these capabilities in the 20th century. Contemporary reports of unidentified aerial phenomena, particularly around nuclear facilities and military installations, align remarkably with ancient descriptions of Anunnaki monitoring activities. The consistency of eyewitness accounts across cultures and decades suggests systematic observation rather than mass hallucination or hoaxes. The ancient texts conclude with a warning that becomes more relevant each year. The Anunnaki return won't be a spiritual event or peaceful reunion. They departed because human development threatened their control, and they will return to re-establish that control when humanity becomes too advanced to ignore. The final tablet of the Epic of Error states, "When the appointed time arrives, the lords of heaven shall descend to settle accounts with their creation." Whether you believe these ancient accounts describe literal events or sophisticated mythology, they raise profound questions about human origins, development, and destiny. The consistency across cultures and the precision of technological details demand serious consideration. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into ancient mysteries, and let us know in the comments. If the Anunnaki were real, would their return be humanity's salvation or our final judgment?